Our speaker today is our dear missionary and leader, Dr. John Bernbaum, the president and founder of the Russian American Institute. And you all know him, I assume, but I won't give a detailed bio. I think he will be able to get started here soon, and I think we'll have a very exciting presentation. He's put this series of slides together because he's just fresh back from Moscow, and he has some new news about some of the ups and downs and twists and turns that have occurred over the past year since we heard from him last. So, John, with that, I think I'll just turn it over to you and let us hear your story.
Thank you. Well, how do I hit the...
You'll have to push the button right here. Just push that on the remote.
Okay. Well, it's a joy to be back with you. I'm sorry that Marge can't be here. I just came back a couple days ago, and I made my wife a wonderful breakfast on Saturday morning. We have this habit where John makes breakfast on Saturday. I made her bacon and eggs. It was just a wonderful breakfast. And about an hour later, she went shopping, and then she came back and threw up. So, and she's been in bed ever since then. So, I don't know what's got to do with the bacon and the eggs, or what the deal is, or just having me back.
There's a news item about a man who was upset over the eggs, and he killed 6 in his family.
Thank you for sharing that. So I've only been back shortly, and we've had just a packed weekend here with all kinds of activities. But unfortunately, she's home in bed. So she's sorry she can't be here, and I'm sorry she's not here. I'm looking forward to sharing with you what's going on in Russia. I want to say just real quickly that I arrived in Russia after the drought, after the heat, and after the smoke. So the first 5 days I was there, it rained every day, and the Russians loved the rain, and it ended the drought, and the heat was gone, and the smoke was gone, and I told the staff, what are you complaining about? What's the problem here? But they've had a disastrous summer. And a number of the staff who wrote me letters during the middle of this crisis wrote in apocalyptic language. Their sense was, is the world coming to an end? I mean, we have never experienced drought and heat and fire condensed in a single period of time like that in Moscow. So it was just a very, very tough time. And it was good to get back and see that Russia is mostly back to normal right now. But it was a very, very painful experience. And a lot of the people just had to vacate the city and try and find places outside the city where they could relax and get some fresh air. We have a couple of pregnant staff members, and they had to flee the country, basically, because it was so bad. So it's been a very difficult environment. And you know, Russia has suffered so much. It's so painful to watch the suffering this country goes through. Some of it is self-inflicted, and some of it, unfortunately, a natural phenomenon. And this was just another one of those experiences. Well, let me walk you through a little briefing. I'm going to make this relatively quick. We're going to have lots of time to talk. So I'll have an opportunity to answer your questions. It's really a strange question to ask, isn't it? Can the Institute make a difference in Russia? And you probably think, what kind of a preposterous question is this? I just want to say I asked that question not because I have some illusion of grandeur that this little institute's going to change the future of Russia, but part of my reason for asking this question is that from my perspective, what we are called to do is to be engaged in our world to make a difference. And when we look at our broken world, we say it doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to be like this. And as people of God, we have a responsibility, I think, to engage our world so it doesn't remain broken and fragmented and so forth. And so I see our little institute, and it's a small part of God's kingdom, as an institute just trying to make a difference in the lives of people and institutions in Russia. And perhaps it's going to be a small contribution, and perhaps we'll never see the results of what we plant. But that seems to me to be what we're about as followers of Christ. And so that's why I asked the question. can this little institute, this small program, actually make a difference in this environment? Now, just a little quick update on the institute itself. This last 12 months has been a roller coaster ride for us in our ministry, and those of you who are involved with us, I think, know about this. This ministry almost died in November and December of last year. We lost our educational license. We were in the process of trying to get it renewed. It took us over a year to get our educational license back. We had to close down the school. I had to fly to Moscow last July, let go of all the students, let go of the staff, release half of the staff, let go of the faculty. I thought we were done. And during the fall of last year, we could offer no courses at the school without the educational license. And meanwhile, the irony was we had this brand new building, beautiful building, coming to completion after 9 years. So the irony was, here was this beautiful building being built, just about completed, and yet we couldn't use it. We didn't have a license, we couldn't do education. So it was a very, very difficult fall. And the Lord and I had a lot of long talks together during that period of time. And I kept pleading with God, saying, I can't believe, Lord, it's been 19 years of involvement here, and you're telling me we got to go home. We got to fold the tent and come home. So it was a very, very difficult period of time. But then a series of wonderful things happened. So talk about a roller coaster ride. We say in Russia, это чудо. It's a miracle. A series of unbelievable sequences happened. Almost 1 year to the day after our license was taken away from us, it was given back. We have no reason why. We got a telephone call one day on December 22 saying, come pick up your license. It's ready. Now, I don't know what happened. I don't know what made the difference. We had reapplied 5 times. We had been rejected 4 times, and all of a sudden we get this telephone call just before Christmas. Now, was it because the bureaucrats said, these guys are not going to pay us? It's been a year. Let's get back to them. I mean, I don't know what the reason was, but the license was given back to us in December. So all of a sudden, we now had the privilege of restarting the school in January. Now, most of our students had enrolled in other schools, so we had lost our population. So now we got on the phone and tried calling students back and so forth. So that was the first kind of wonderful thing for us. And then I was walking through an investment bank that one of my trustees runs in Moscow, and I noticed a whole bunch of computers. They were downsizing their corporation. So I said to him, what are you doing with all these computers? No, we're going to downsize. We'll probably sell them. So, make a long story short, we got 50 state-of-the-art computers for $5,000. It's kind of a gift. They had to charge us something for tax purposes. So all of a sudden, this little school of ours had the state-of-the-art computers for $5,000. And then, 2 weeks before the building dedication on May 27th, we had this building dedication. We had about 40 Americans come to be a part of this building dedication. We got a call from the Canadian Embassy saying, we have some used furniture. Would you like some furniture? You're one of 4 nonprofit corporations that we've called, and if you want to come over and take a look at the furniture, you're welcome to have it. But you have to come right away, and the furniture has to be out the door in 24 hours. So one of my staff guys got a truck and went over there, and 3 other nonprofit corporations showed up, but they were much too slow. And the Canadian authorities said, just take what you want. So we don't know for sure, but we're going to guess probably $200,000 worth of furniture. I mean, we completely furnished our building. And by the way, there was not one extra desk. It was exactly what we needed to furnish our building. Bookcases, file cabinets, chairs. I mean, the quality stuff we would never buy ourselves. Beautiful stuff. 2 weeks before the building dedication. Miraculous. And we're not exactly sure why we got called. But it was another one of these things. And then one of our staff guys, here we had all these people coming in for graduation, dedication. We didn't have any chairs. We had a big, beautiful conference room, but no chairs. One of my staff guys got on the phone and found 360 chairs for like 30% of the price, picked them up 2 days later, and all of a sudden we had an auditorium full of chairs. And then the other issue was, we're going to have all these people come for the building dedication. We don't have an occupancy permit for the building, so technically it's illegal. So if we have the U.S. ambassador come and all these government executives come and we're not in the building legally, this could be a really bad thing. And about 10 days before the building dedication, got the permit. That sometimes takes 3 years in Russia. We got it in 6 months. So it's just, when we look back on that, we said, Lord, what are you doing here? I mean, November, December, we're almost out of business, and now all these miraculous things happening. And, of course, the highlight for us was the building dedication and graduation on May 27 and May 28. And I would say the highlight for me was when we had the graduation ceremony on Friday. The room was absolutely jammed. We've never had so many people there. Standing room only in this room, 400 and some people. And at the end of the graduation, it morphed into a worship service where we just praised God for the building. And we sang How Great Thou Art in 2 languages. Everybody stood and sang this, and tears were flowing down people's faces, and it was just absolutely an incredible experience. So it's been quite a roller coaster ride. These are our graduates. This, by the way, this man right here is the deputy chairman of the Moscow City Council, who's a very dear friend of mine. And he came and gave us a beautiful plaque during dedication time and so forth. So it's been an incredible roller coaster ride at the Russian American Institute. And of course, one thing that's great about an academic program is that you start again in September. Everything is always a new year, right? So we're really energized to get back there. And September 1 is the day of education. Every school in Russia starts on September 1. And so we also began our program on September 1. And to have the students come back onto campus and have faculty return again and all the energy that that generates was really very, very exciting. So we're back in business. We have to regrow the program now because we've been out of business for a year. So it's going to take us a while to rebuild our program. But a couple of new things have happened. In addition to the intensive English language program, which we've had for a number of years, and our undergraduate program, which we've added a number of new other programs, like this English language school. When I got to Moscow 2 weeks ago, we had 20 students enrolled. Then 25, then 30, then 35, then 40, now 45. That program just took off. And the students flocking through the door for that program. And so we kind of kept the first bunch of students at about 45 students. And we'll start another group in another couple of weeks. But it's English language instruction by native English language teachers, which makes it very unusual in Russia. There are many competing programs in Russia. But many of them are taught by Russians themselves, not by native English language speakers. And our faculty are all language certified native speakers. So it makes it a very, very attractive program. This may become for us kind of the wave of the future for our school, these specialized programs. 90% of the students in this language school are from our immediate neighborhood, including the daughter of the local government executive who runs our region. That's a good thing. She will, of course, pass. But that's a new part of our life, and we're pretty excited about that because it gives us tremendous opportunity, of course, to share our testimony as we have the opportunity. In addition to that, for example, we're doing a series of short-term certificate programs. For example, next month, we're starting 5 different counseling programs. Short-term counseling programs, family crisis counseling, what they call social rehabilitation counseling. I don't even know what that is. HIV/AIDS counseling, and so forth. There's not much counseling done in the churches in Russia. Seminaries don't do anything in this field. So we're beginning to offer a series of short-term courses, and our social work chair, who has a PhD in counseling, has formed a club of Christian counselors now. And I'm going to bring Kathy Iverson over there. She's going to be a part of this in the future.
First time I heard about that.
I want to do it publicly, so I got her commitment here. Anyway, it's for us a very exciting thing because these counselors have come to us and they said, our pastors won't let us practice in our churches. because they don't believe in counseling. They don't trust psychology, you know. I mean, with psychology, these are very conservative churches. And so these counselors are trained and want to go to work, and the needs are so overwhelming, and there's no outlet. So we're trying to make our school a center for this kind of Christian counseling as an example. And then we had a very large charismatic church come to us. They got about 3,000 people who gather on Sunday every Sunday morning in Moscow. It's one of the biggest churches in Moscow. And they came to us and said, would you do specialized courses for us, for members of our congregation? We don't have the people on staff to do training for our congregation. So if you would do some courses for us, could we bring over 100 or 150 students into your conference room? And I said, I think we could do that. I think we could find a way of working this out. So it just seems to us that there are some extraordinary opportunities here. So the undergraduate program, I think, is struggling to get off the ground, but all of these other programs are really taking off. So that's some good. So there is some good news from Moscow, despite what the Washington Post tells you, and the Economist and a few other magazines. There are a few good things going on. Now, I put together real quickly just some 10 reasons why Russia matters. This is written by James Collins and one of his colleagues. James Collins was the ambassador in Moscow for a period of time. I've gone through, I think, 6 ambassadors in Moscow. James Collins is one of those. And he put together a kind of a list of reasons why Russia is kind of important, why we have to engage Russia. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time walking through this, but it seems to me that Russia has disappeared from the agenda in many places. When I travel around to various colleges and talk to them about Russia, Russia is just not on their agenda. Africa is, Latin America is, Asia is, China and India, but Russia's kind of disappeared. It's no longer, quote, hot and sexy, like it was in the 90s. It's simply not on people's agendas. And so I think people like Ambassador Collins are writing things trying to say, you know, Russia is too significant to ignore. And these are some of the reasons. And again, I'm not going to walk through these. I just want to add them, put them together quickly. But you know, to me, it's so interesting. This is a typical, sorry, Clyde, typical State Department perspective. This is looking at things from our own security interests point of view, our own national interest point of view, why Russia is important for us because of our national interest. And of course, I respect those and appreciate that, but there's much more on the table besides those interests, national interests of the United States. There are also questions about the role of the Christian community in particular, and the role of religion, the role that religion can play to make a positive influence in this environment. I just want to tell you real quickly that this issue of the role of religion in international relations has been something that's been on my heart. If I weren't a college president, I'd be working on stuff like this. But we just published a little book called God and the Global Order, published by Baylor University Press. And I have an article in here entitled Reading Russia Right, trying to talk about understanding Russia and understanding also the religious, moral, and spiritual character of this country, and how that can become a factor in terms of building our relationship. And for me, when I look at Russia and the potential of that country and the challenges that country faces, it seems to me that the Christian community and spiritual renewal is absolutely critical to the life of this country. If there is no spiritual renewal in Russia, Russia has no future, as far as I'm concerned. It's a hopeless, corrupt mess with a historical legacy that is full of pain and violence. And the hope that I see for that country is in the Christian community, because there are people at work quietly building the foundations of grassroots movements, building the foundations of democratic life, very quietly now. And there are some new things happening in the Russian Orthodox Church that we can talk about in a few moments. So there are some good things going on, but it's because I think of the family of faith. And so one of the reasons I'm anxious to see our institute grow is because we can be a facilitator, a mediator in this process. this was a very significant insight that I picked up. Let me read this to you. Can you read this from the back? Can you read this? Yes? Let's go through this a minute. The middle class by itself won't be Russia's salvation. You know, conventional wisdom is that if we build this capitalist economy in Russia, there will be an emerging middle class, and this middle class will become the leading cutting edge in terms of democratization in the country. That's conventional wisdom, right? So what we need to do is encourage democratic growth, encourage this middle class, and my lens, it'll lead to a democratic structure. Well, that's true, of course, except every place in the world except when it's not true. And it's not true in Russia. Let's take a look. The middle class by itself won't be Russia's salvation. The average Russian does not have any desire to get involved in public affairs or build civil society, and the reason for that lies not in the paternalism many profess to see, you know, the pattern of the past under Soviet rule or Tsarist rule, but in the personal egoism of Russians who are concerned only about themselves, their family, and their close friends. The entire national structure with regard to the nature of politics will have to be transformed. Something that is not a matter of a few years or an increase in the incomes of one part of the population. That's a profound insight about what's going on in Russia. When I read this insight, that following weekend, I had my little group. I have a group of business leaders called the 5-on-5 group that I've been mentoring for about 3 years. They're young, hotshot business leaders, Russians and Americans. And we had a weekend retreat together, talking about vocation and calling. But over the dinner time, I read them that quote and said, what do you think about this? And every one of them said, that's absolutely a reflection of what's going on in our country.
Who is this individual, John?
He's a journalist, a Russian journalist, very thoughtful Russian journalist who's written some very provocative.
When did he write that?
Pardon?
When did he write that?
When did he write that? I saw it 2 weeks ago. But it's a very significant insight because what you find, and these, my business guys that I had this weekend retreat with told me, you know, when you go out with my friends on the weekend and you get together, you never talk about what's going on with Putin and Medvedev and the election in 2012. No one's talking about that stuff. No one's talking about human rights issues and the violation of journalists and what happens with them and getting beat on the side of the head with a nightstick. I mean, come on. People are talking about salaries, trips to Cyprus, how we can get the next job. A lot of concern for their own families, a lot of concern for their own relatives, closeness, hospitality towards those that they know and they love, but kind of an animosity toward anybody else that they don't know. That's so much the character. Now, you can talk for a while about why that happened, and there's a lot of history there, and I don't have time to go into all that right now. But it seems to me to be a very accurate summary of what is actually going on there. And the only way, it seems to me, to break through this kind of stuff is to have a spiritual renewal. An understanding of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And to live out your faith in ways that impact the common good, not just a self-centered focus. We can come back to that with your questions if you have comments. So here's some of the things that we can talk about. In my judgment, spiritual renewal is the key to what's going on in Russia. And I've got a few humorous stories I can tell you about, give you an illustration of that if you'd like. And in my mind, education is one of the keys. And another facet here is building cooperation among Christians. In the early 1990s, Baptists didn't talk to Mennonites, they didn't talk to Charismatics, they didn't talk to Orthodox, nobody talked to Catholics. The animosity among Christians was unbelievable. And they're 2% of the population in Russia. Active church attendance is 2% of the population. And no one's talking to each other. But what's happening now is that people are starting to come together. People of faith are starting to come together. And it is beautiful to see. And I think it's going to make a difference in the future of this country. It's slow, but it's starting to happen, and it's very exciting. And our little school was playing a little bit of a role in that, not a lot. And then, of course, raising a new generation of leaders. And what we're trying to do also is starting to bring American students to Russia. Starting next September, we're going to have a study abroad program where we bring North American students to Moscow to study alongside of our students, our Russian students. And the vision here is the next generation leadership, Russian and American, can start to build some bridges together, get to know each other, break down the stereotypes. And hopefully, by God's grace, we'll see some peacemaking come out of this process. So that's the vision that we're operating with right now, and that's what I'd love to talk to you about over time. How can you help? I'm a college president. I have to do fundraising. Of course, scholarship funds and support, of course, is of critical importance to us, particularly for many of our Russian kids who come from families that have been pushed out to the provincial cities and live on marginal incomes, and then those students want to come to our school and live in Moscow, which is one of the most expensive cities in the world. And they just can't do it unless they get scholarship support. So that's a critical thing. Number two, I want you to come to Moscow and get to work. Huh? I want you to come to Moscow and get to work. We got a new building now, and we got places where you can stay. And we got things for you to do. So one of the ideas I wanted to talk to you about is, are you interested in coming and working, being a part of this whole thing? You can work in a library, you can do English language instruction with students, you can do some teaching if you have the credentials. There are a number of ways in which you could play a role. And I'm actually going to give you some sign-up sheets after a while, if you're interested to come to be a part of this. So we'd love to have you. And then finally, of course, we really need to solicit your prayers. Okay? Now, let's talk. Hope that was enough to give you a sense of what's going on. Oh no, David, here we go.
The Orthodox Church has a new, strong leader, young, charismatic. What kind of a relationship has he allowed with the Christian community, or is he really an enemy of the Christian community? The traditional Protestant community.
Yeah. Well, this is a very exciting thing to talk to you about. Thank you for that question. I would not respond to your question in writing or publicly about this, because it's something that we don't talk about publicly, but let me tell you what's going on. When Kirill became the new patriarch, when Alexei II died and Kirill became the new patriarch, Kirill was, before he was patriarch, Secretary of State of the Russian Orthodox Church. That was his job. They have a Department of External Relations. It's their State Department. And when he became patriarch, he took this young guy named Hilarion, 42-year-old young man, bumped him over about 300 senior bureaucrats, and made him the new Secretary of State. Well, Hilarion is an amazing man. He's 42 years old, 2 PhDs, one from Oxford University, fluent in about 7 different languages, has written probably, I think, 8 or 9 books, written about 500 articles, has composed music oratorios. The guy is amazing. He is the humblest man you're ever going to meet in your life, and a follower of Christ. And he's become a friend. He's become a friend. And I've met with him several times, and through one of my trustees who got to know him. And he's just, you want to just hug the guy when you're with him, because he's just so humble and gracious. He has basically came to us and said, I want to build bridges with evangelical Christians in America. And we have been living, these are literally his words, we have been living in a ghetto for decades. We've been talking to ourselves. We've had no relationship with anybody in the West. We need to change all this. We need to totally reform theological education in Orthodox academies. And I'm going, oh my lands, why is that guy telling me this? We've got to totally redo it, how we do education. And then at the end of the conversation, he said, would you help me? I said, well, I'm a little busy, but if I can be helpful, we will go to work. So one of the things that we're doing now is we've started a lecture series. And he's asked me to bring Western scholars to Moscow to teach at his brand new academy. They have a brand new spiritual academy they started in Moscow that Kirill put together to vet the best and brightest of the Russian Orthodox leadership of the church. They want this academy to vet their top people, to be diplomats and intellectuals and managers and leaders in the church. And he said, our academies are doing a terrible job. So we're going to start this new program in Moscow. And I've never done an academy like this, John, and you have, your whole career has been in education, so you help me do this. Well, I can't help too much, but I'll try. So we're now bringing him lectures. So last year I brought in 2 scholars from the West who talked about civil society and rule of law issues. And we did a series of lectures, and they speak at their academy, and then they come and speak at our institute. And the Bradley Foundation in Milwaukee has graciously picked up the bill for this, which is very nice. By the way, just a little parenthetical story about that. The man from the Bradley Foundation was visiting my office, and when I told him about this relationship with Hilaria, and he knows him, he said, well, John, if you do that, we'll fund it. And then about 5 minutes later, John, if you do that, we'll fund it. I said, Dan, I'm a college president. You say it once. I got it, man. 3 weeks later, we had a check. So this thing is off and running. I met with the vice rector of this academy last week, and I had asked him, give me your top 5 priorities for this coming year. What topics do you want us to bring people in on and so forth? Who would you like? So he gave me 5 names. Now, I'm going to tell you, I probably shouldn't do this, but the number 1 name on the list, have you ever heard of Al Plantinga? He's a former professor at Calvin College. He's now at the University of Notre Dame. He's one of the top Christian philosophers in the country. And I just bust out laughing. I said, I cannot believe you asked for Al Plantinga as your number 1 guy. So we're working on bringing these scholars in. So it's a very extraordinary opportunity for us. And so I'm hoping by God's grace this kind of thing will happen. And we're also talking about, we also established a relationship with Solzhenitsyn's family. And we're now trying to do a kind of a Solzhenitsyn lecture series, an annual lecture series, where we bring in Orthodox scholars and Protestant scholars and talk about the contribution of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. So a lot of stuff is going on. Hilarion is also the one, by the way, on May 20, who went to the Vatican, and they played a whole evening of music for the Pope on Russian music. And one of the pieces they played was the composition on the Passion of Christ that Hilarion wrote. And there's photographs on YouTube with him sitting right next to the Pope. These are communities that wouldn't even talk to themselves 3 years ago. And there's Hilarion next to the Pope, talking about the music and so forth. So there's stuff going on. That's a long answer to your question, but it's very exciting. But obviously, we got to keep a little low profile on it. At this point. Yes.
People like Plantinga that you're bringing over, they'll be there for a series of lectures or short courses or what's that?
Yes. Yeah. What we've had structured now is they do a series of 4 lectures, and then they come over to our institute, and then we do a public event for them at our school as well. So they come for about a week, travel time included. Yes.
John, the last time I heard you speak here, you mentioned a nascent movement within the Orthodox Church to concern themselves with the social implications of the gospel, and that younger Orthodox priests were beginning to address needs in their community. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, that's exactly what's driving this whole thing. That's how the relationship with Hilarion was built. Because when he became the Secretary of State of the Church, he contacted a number of people, business leaders in Moscow, including one of my trustees, Bob Forsman, and said, would you bring together a group of Russian business people, because we want to talk about how we can meet the human needs in Russian society. Instead of spending all our money rebuilding old church buildings, we want to start helping people who are in human needs, and we need the help of business leaders. So he brought together a group of about 25 business leaders. There were 2 Americans there, and 23 some Russian business leaders. The 2 American members were both board members at our institute. They're completely fluent in Russian. And Hilarion began the meeting by doing a Bible study, which just blew my guys away. I mean, they said, oh my lands, this guy is a marvelous Bible teacher. That was as solidly evangelical as you can find any place in the country. This guy's Orthodox. What's going on here? Many of the Russians, business guys, have no idea. And they have an Orthodox profession, thank you, Kathy, but not much active knowledge of Scripture. So that planted the seeds. And so since then, Clyde, that's what's driving this conversation. How can the church be more responsive to human need? How can we get priests on a local parish level to really have an impact on society, build communities? One thing he's been very open about, he said, we have to learn from the Catholics and the Protestants how to build congregational life. Again, this guy he's so honest, it scares you. He said, you can walk in our Orthodox church and you worship and you go home, you never talk to anybody. There's no community. There's something wrong with this. And when young girls come walking into the church, and if they don't have a hair covering on, all the babushkas run up to them and start yelling at them. Stop yelling at the young girls. We want them in the church. So this is what he's doing. He's really kicking things up. But it's because of this drive to reach out. And I pray for his viability. I mean, there are xenophobic elements of the church who really hate this man. Because we're talking to Catholics, he's talking to Protestants, and they really don't like this. So we need to pay for his protection. Look, I'd like to cut you off, Mike. Come here, and then I'll go here, and then we'll go.
Some of the recent graduates, what are they doing? Are they looking for jobs, advanced degrees, or what's ahead of them?
Yeah. Next question. We're doing all those things. Yeah, our business people are doing very well. They're getting snapped up. I mean, between their business training and the bilingual skills and computer skills, and I think they're grounding spiritually and morally, they're doing very well. I would say 2/3 of them are going toward multinationals. An increasing number now are starting to get jobs with Russian businesses, but many of them are going to the Marriotts and the Boeings and those kind of places because they're in pretty good place. We don't have enough experience with our language majors yet. What many of those kids are doing is they're using their English language skills to be translators, and then they're doing other things on the side. Our social work kids are the ones who are really struggling because you can't live on a social worker salary in Moscow. It's not possible. It's below subsistence level. And yet we're training them to work with street kids and orphans and so forth and so on. So what we're doing right now with them is we're teaching them, we're actually doing some courses on how to organize a nonprofit corporation, the legal requirements that are involved there, how you do fundraising, and a couple of them have actually gone out and started their own little nonprofits and are working in some of these areas. Some of the needs that they're starting to address now for the first time the Russian government is starting to look at. So, for example, handicapped children who historically in Russia are hidden. We never see them. They warehouse them, usually outside of the large cities. We just had a series of major concerts in Moscow where the mayor of the city said, you know what, we got a lot of handicapped people here. We need to start giving them opportunities. And so forth. So they're starting now for the first time to begin to address the special needs categories of people who up until this time were totally ignored. So we think there's going to be some opportunities for our social work kids. Our building is one of the few handicapped accessible buildings in Moscow. So they've actually used our building as kind of a site to show people, you can actually make a building where handicapped people can get access to it. Hello. So that's been a little quiet testimony that we've been able to be involved in. But I am concerned about the social work kids because that program, it may not survive. Because the kids are they have a desire, but it's real hard to live that way.
Part of the culture, as you said earlier anyway, social. Earlier you said the Russians don't have any social concerns largely.
Yeah. The needs are overwhelming, but yes.
I had a question on influence in a fabric of corruption. Over the years, you talked about how you've kind of engendered relationships with senior officials in Moscow Council and other places. And so I have a two-part question. One is, what's the influence of those relationships on the bureaucracy? And did the fact you don't pay bribes make a difference? Back to your original question, can you make a difference? Because you've really reached out to this organization. The question is, how influential were those relationships? It seems like it's just like a pop-up to get your last
I don't know.
It's about modeling.
Pardon?
It's about modeling. What
Yeah,
you're doing
yeah.
is modeling.
It's so hard to measure or evaluate. It is, thank you. It is an important thing that we're doing in terms of modeling, but it's very, very hard to assess that. It's so interesting to me, for example, how some of the leaders in the Christian community, for example, when we had our building dedication, a number of Baptist leaders come up to me afterwards and said, "How much did you pay to get Platanov to come? He's a chairman of Moscow City Council. What'd you pay? How much did you pay to get him to come?" I said, "He's been my friend since 1994. He stayed in my house. I don't pay him to come, you know." But that's the way they think. They assume. And we had the deputy ambassador. What'd that cost you? So within the Christian community, there's so much suspicion here because that's normally the way things are done. And we're trying to say to people, you don't have to live that way. There is another way to live. And friendship building is part of it. But I don't know that I can assess what the impact of that is. I don't know. It's very hard to measure the impact of that. I mean, I do know, for example, when Platanov, the deputy chairman of Moscow City Council, got up to speak at our dedication, I was taken by his presentation. I thought to myself, has he come to faith? He was starting to use vocabulary that I'd never heard out of his mouth before, talking about blessing and grace. And I'm thinking, I never heard you talk that way before. And I'm wondering if something's going on spiritually with him. And has that been part of our relationship? I don't know. I don't know how to assess that. And on some of these other decisions, I think that's one of the frustrating things for me in Russia. You never know what's going on. I mean, why did we lose our license? Why did it take us 12 months to get it back? I don't know. I got some ideas, but I'll probably never know. Why did we get it back 12 months later? I don't know. You can't find out. It's impossible to find out. So you have to constantly operate in this kind of an environment. And for a personality like me, that's rough. Nancy. I'm sorry. Gene, then I'll come to Nancy. Yeah.
It seems to me from what you're telling us that you mentioned capitalism, that their growth in capitalism, when we seem to be losing that over here. And also, we have a wall that separates, which is fabricated, between the church and state. There seems to be more flexibility. Seems to be they are growing where we're not in the relationship between the state and the church.
Well,
we have restrictions. I mean, you can hardly mention God in some places. Here,
there's a couple sides to that in the Russian context. On one level, there's an openness about spiritual issues that does not exist here.
That's right.
So you can talk about spiritual issues without apology and with government leaders. I mean, it's just, it's not kind of, oh, that's separated.
No,
so,
no.
You know, that phenomenon's not there. On the one hand, great openness. And, you know, I've been invited to speak at a couple of universities, talk about the impact of Christianity on social change. I can't even imagine doing that at the University of Maryland where I got my PhD.
Right,
they never invite me to come back and talk on that subject at the University of Maryland.
That's a concern of mine.
So that's part of it. On the other hand, the issue of the relationship between the church and the state is a wide open question. It's not a settled issue. And whether the Orthodox Church will again become kind of the one equal above all other equals, whether there really will be freedom of expression or freedom of religion in that country, it's not a settled issue. It's still under conversation. Russians look at the United States and they go, well, we're not interested in that model. They look at Western Europe and they're not so sure they want to be Western.
We're losing our freedoms here. We're losing our freedoms there.
I'm not going to go down that path. But I want to talk about it in the Russian context.
We need to go down that path.
But in the Russian context, it's still a very open issue. And I think that's why this relationship with the Orthodox Church is so critical with Hilarion right now, because there's an openness on his part to work with.
How do you spell his name?
Hilarion. Look him up on his website. Listen to his music.
I would like to.
He's a good possibility, by the way. He is coming here for the National Prayer Breakfast.
Oh, right.
And we're going to talk about possibly doing a concert while he's here. So that's all under conversation right now. We'll see what happens. I'm sorry, there were a number. Now, Nancy, then John. Go ahead.
Well,
and then over here.
You picked up on an insight I've heard you talk about multiple times that I would encourage you to include in this presentation after that quote. And that has to do with the Russian DNA and the American DNA.
Yeah.
And those changes that you're talking about, and Dave and I are very excited about this, but The changes that you're talking about will become systemic when 3 of those DNA pieces begin to change. A concept of voluntarism, which from my own hands-on perspective there, just doesn't exist. You can't get board members, for example.
Yeah.
That is not part of their DNA. The second is the concept of win-win, which we understand deep in our bones, and they really don't understand if I win, you lose. And I would say the third piece is whether we exercise it or not as Americans, in our DNA is social responsibility. And the handicap piece, the social work piece isn't going to get off the ground until systemically they understand that. So I would just encourage you to include that as a follow-on.
Good. Amen. Amen. One of the tools, Nancy, that we use with our students, that fits right along those lines, is I use Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which goes right at some of these issues. For example, number 1, be proactive. Hey, take some responsibility.
Get the truck.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know,
Clean up the home.
because the social pattern is someone else will do it for you. Government's responsibility. Not my responsibility. Not my job. But my business guys, when I talk to them about this, they said, hey, John, be patient. It's starting to happen. And one of the guys just bought a new apartment in a condo in downtown in Moscow. He said, you know, we got to finally organize a condo association, and I got the people together. We formed a little council, and now we're taking care of our property out in front. These people would never work together. They didn't talk to each other before. So it's starting to happen. Be patient, be patient. But those are very important pieces. Yeah, we're working hard on that. I'm lost track now, so I'm sorry, friends. A couple of you had hands up. John, or here, please. Yes.
2 different questions.
No, you only get one, man. No, go ahead. One kid. Oh, you tell me how much time. We're doing okay time-wise? No? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering if you see any correlation in the attitudes that are reflected in how accepting they are of you between that and flaws at the high politics level. Such, I think it's generally thought that our relations have improved in the last year or so, for example. And that's one question. And the other is,
let me quickly address the first one.
Yeah.
Yes. The mood is more constructive, more positive right now with the new administration. And the embassy people tell me there's an openness now that simply was not there, particularly at the second George W.'s administration, second term. There is an openness that just was not there present before. And there are all kinds of activities going on now with these presidential task forces. I think there are 8 of them that have been established. And the one that I'm getting involved in is the one education, culture, and sports. And so a lot of stuff is happening. And so I'm trying to say, hey, we're here, been here 14 years, hello, we'd like to be involved in this. So some good things are going on there, which is very good. And again, there are things you're never going to read about in the newspaper. But it's quietly happening. And that's a good thing. Now, in this vertical of power, power vertical, they call it, it's such a top-down structure that when Medvedev and Obama get together and put their arms around each other and have a hamburger someplace, it impacts all the way down the food chain. It's quite clear. And then government bureaucrats kind of back off, and people like us have a little bit more freedom. When things get real tough between these presidents, it comes down the food chain, and it gets a little nasty. So I would say there is definitely more of an upbeat environment right now, which helps places like ours. But I also realize that many of the things that we do and have been able to do are because that we are Americans. A number of our church leaders say, John, we could never do what you're doing. They're giving you a break because you're foreign. There's some element of truth to that, too. I understand that as well. Second question.
How much Russian do you have to know to be effective as in teaching English?
Our school is bilingual. Students have to be bilingual to go to our school. So we teach in both languages.
I was thinking about volunteers.
Oh, If you came as a volunteer, you could just operate in English. And if you wanted to do conversational English for our intensive English language program, you would just practice talking to students in English. They need a lot of practice. And it's a great opportunity for you to tell stories, you know, about your own narrative, your own life, and so forth and so on. That reminds me of one little footnote I got to tell you. Just on that point, we had a theology professor come, who was a very, very good theology prof, from my alma mater. And he brought his wife along with him, and they came for a semester. And I knew he would do a great job in the classroom. But you know, after a semester, the biggest blessing was his wife. Because what she did is that she met with some of our gals and did English language practice with them. And while she was doing this practice, she would talk to them about their marriage, their spiritual life, what they'd gone through, some of the struggles. And these kids have never had anybody disciple them like that. And so when we got to the little farewell graduation, you know, he got up and they thanked him for his time, and she got up and the kids started screaming. I thought, you know, what a powerful impact. People just have never had the opportunity to be discipled like this. And particularly our kids who come from Baptist churches. I mean, you know, once they come to faith in the Baptist church, that's enough. Then they get no other experiences. Yes?
John, sorry, I'm going to have to leave. I've got to get over to the children. But I want to just leave a thought for you all. This a carryover from some of our other time with you. And that is, would it be possible to have permission from church staff that this class could adopt you as our mission? And to think about specifically ways that we could help you and really commit as restless to really come alongside of you and just sort of adopting you as a way to have a real support for you and for the institution. So I leave that thought.
Bye. Thank you. By the way, I'm going to leave these little sign-up sheets up here. If you're interested in possibly coming to Moscow at some point, if you could tell us what you'd like to do and how long you can come and what you're interested in, and we'll start working on it. Don?
Going back to that statement that you posted and quoted about the culture in Russia, the things that the population there seem to be interested in are their personal security. They're at the level of, is my job secure, or perhaps they're at that level. Can I expect the government to be stable and survive and so on? If you really have uncertainty about your job security and the stability of the government and that kind of thing, then those things, I think, become your first order of priority and concern. And so I'm wondering, how does the population feel about those kind of basic things, their job security, etc.? That might explain, is what I'm thinking, the level of their thought and concern.
Well, I think that might explain part of it, but from my point of view, it's more a result of this aggressive, materialistic drive. These kids are, a lot of these young people that we know, they're working 6 days a week, they're working 10, 12 hours a day. They just have such a drive to make it. And some of these corporations, for example, KPMG and Ernst & Young, have programs where they say to their staff, you know, take a day off a month and do voluntary work. They won't do it. They will hire somebody to do it for them, because that day off could cost them, you know, a little promotion in the corporation and so forth. That's what we're talking about. That's the mentality we're talking about. That's got to change, I think. And that's going to take time to make that kind of change. But that's the drive we're talking about with these folks. It's really an incredible drive. Now, I don't know how some of these young families in Washington, in Moscow, survive. I mean, if you get married and have a child, and then you got two working spouses, you know, the kids go with the grandparents, the parents never see their kids. These kids are working 50, 60 hours a week. Driven, this compulsive drive to make it big time. And because there are a lot of opportunities, it's not because we're worried about job security, they're worried about the next step up. It's an escalator right now. And, you know, they're driving expats out. And the Nationals are filling the slots, and they're making good money. Yes.
Throughout the discussion.
Sorry, John, I keep on. Go ahead.
I got a plug for you.
Bruce, I'll come back to you in a minute, Bruce. I'm sorry.
Let me just say 2 seconds. Later.
Okay. Go, Bruce.
Throughout the discussion, we've spoken of Russia as Russia, and my question is, are there enough differences between what's happening in Moscow and what's happening around the rest of the country, the Muslim Chechnya issue being one, but the Far East is really far in Russia. So my question is, it's enough to focus on Moscow, but when we speak of it, what should we know in terms of your influence, the influence of your institution and of Moscow in this vast, vast expanse?
Yeah.
Oh, Bruce, that's a whole other conversation. I think it's a wonderful question.
Yeah.
And it would be really fun to talk to you about that. I would say the kind of reflections that I was trying to talk about are, I would say, generally applicable to Russia west of the Ural Mountains. That's Western Russia. This is the kind of phenomenon we're talking about. But once you go east of the Urals to Siberia, along the Central Asian Republic, it's a whole other story. And the Muslim powder keg it's a very serious issue. The explosiveness of what's going on in Central Asian republics right now, and the amount of violence that could erupt. The Russians have one response to that, which is brutal, violent suppression. And so whenever they have a problem, they send in more troops and shoot more people. And then they wonder why they come to Moscow and blow up subways. I mean, this is the kind of cycle that we're in right now with those parts of the world. So that's a whole other issue. And then, of course, the Far East, along the Pacific Rim, is a whole other question. I mean, there's a separate economy developing there in relationship to Korea and Japan and China. And you look down the road a ways and you go, where is this going? In terms of the future of this country. And meanwhile, right across the Amur River in China, are thousands of people per square mile, and all this vacant space in Siberia. And how long is it going to be before the Chinese wake up someday and say, "Hey, why don't we just take some of that land? Why do we need it?" So there's just a lot of complex issues there. I don't think. I think Putin and Medvedev have restless nights. I think the things that are on their plate are just overwhelming in terms of responsibility. So it's a staggering thing. That's a whole other conversation, Bruce. Maybe we come back at a later time and talk about that. I don't think, and by the way, not many of our students come from those areas. Our kids primarily come from west of the Urals. A lot of different cities west of the Urals, but we don't have many from Siberia.
I just want to quickly...
We're going to end here, Paul.
Are you ready, John? Are you really ready? Ready to go. 4 years ago, I did a audit of your institute for the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, and
hey, we'll be talking about this publicly.
I want to put the good housekeeping seal of approval on your finances, and say, which may still exist, it may not, the degree to which you are tied by tithe gifts limits the discretion of management. And I think that was one of the issues that you were struggling with. And I just say, that's, if you have confidence in the management, and I guess, yes, we do, then you give untied, because otherwise it becomes bureaucratic, difficult. And you really, I've seen lots of Christian environments where people are making exorbitant amounts of money as a percentage of total revenue, and they're way off base. And that's what that organization is key to do, and that's not what this Russian Institute was doing, certainly. And so I commend you, John, for what you're doing, and pray for you, and wish I was a millionaire that I could give money to.
Thank you. Paul, can I end with one little story?
Sure.
This story developed. I think I have a little humor. You got to have a good sense of humor in working for Russia, or you don't survive. Traffic in Moscow is unbelievable. If you get the New Yorker, there was a big article about a month ago on traffic in Moscow. It's impossible. The highlight for me was one event where I had one day where I had 3 meetings downtown, and I spent 4.5 hours in a van driving to these 3 meetings. 4.5 hours just to get across town to go to 3 meetings. So it's just nuts. the son of the former Prime Minister of Japan came to Moscow to do a study of traffic. He's an expert in urban development. And so he got a professorship at Moscow State University and launched his big study of traffic in Moscow, how to improve traffic in Moscow. And he wrote a book. He and the head of the Russian traffic department in Moscow. And about 2 weeks ago, they had a book launch. They were going to announce this, publish this book. And his father was going to fly in from Japan to be a part of the book launch. Well, his father lands from Japan at the airport that I almost always fly into, and started to drive through traffic to get to the event. Couldn't get there. Traffic was so bad he couldn't get there. Mayor Lushkov, who was the mayor daily of Moscow, when he found out about this, sent a huge police escort down to the airport to go get his father, this guy's father. Now, one of the things that this guy wrote in his book was, one of the big problems in Moscow is when these guys put their little blue lights on top of their car and get police escorts and, violate traffic and hold up traffic and so forth. So Lushkov goes and sends this delegation down to the airport, drives this guy. If he comes an hour and a half late, they hold up the whole book presentation so they could just be there for his son's presentation, where he talked about exactly not doing what they just did. And I thought, what a story. What a modern parable of Russia. And what does the guy say? The bottom line of his presentation, he actually published a book saying this. You know what Russians need to do? They just need to be more polite. I thought, now isn't that profound? That is really a profound insight. So this is what it's like to work in Russia, friends.
Thank you.